It's now time for Fantasy Football Today for CBS Local Sports, where we give you some starts and sits for Week 15 to help you win in those fantasy playoffs. Let's start at the quarterback position. And Dave, our start of the week, CBS Sports, is Dak Prescott. He's playing very well, at least in his last two games, coming off a monster performance against the New York Giants. I think he will keep it up for at least one more game against the Raiders. They've averaged about 20 points per game, two opposing quarterbacks. I know they played well lately, but the opponents haven't been exactly what Prescott brings when that offensive line is healthy, when he has a run game to support him. With the way Dez Bryant is playing right now, I think Prescott finds his way to 25 fantasy points. A very good starting option, certainly much better than I think what Alex Smith will do in his home game against the Chargers. Look, Smith has had a very good season. Some would call it a great season, but I think this matchup is not exactly in his favor. Looking at what you've seen from the Chargers, only one quarterback so far this year over 20 fantasy points. That was week 1. He had 18 fantasy points at Los Angeles when these two teams met previously this season. I think Smith's got a ceiling of about 18 fantasy points. I would try to sit him.
For the past few weeks, I've been nervous to trust Jonathan Stewart. I'm going with it now. How could you not? 5 touchdowns in his last 3 games. And how about this? In his last 4 games, 100 yards or a touchdown in each one. And he's averaged over 4 yards per carry in 3 of the 4 games. And I like the way that this game could unfold for Carolina, where they lean on the run against Aaron Rodgers and the Packers. I think Jonathan Stewart gets the keys to the end zone again this week. He gets a decent amount of yards. I think he's a good number 2 running back for fantasy. And Kerwin Williams has been getting a lot of carries. I don't think he necessarily gets a lot of catches. And I don't know if he's going to work the goal line. Cardinals have kind of been secretly, low-key been using a 3-headed running back group. Williams is the best of the bunch, but he's going across the country to play against Washington. Not the easiest matchup in the world. It's also not the hardest matchup in the world. I think he's right around 75 yards. Low-end number 2, high-end number 3 fantasy running back.
Ask now, ask how. Maybe ask how to sit Kerwin Williams if you're afraid.
Ask somebody else.
Of his matchup. Speaking of good matchups, the Jaguars have great matchups this week, and Jadeveon Clowney may not play. He missed practice on Friday, so that will certainly help Blake Bortles and this passing attack. And usually we only give you 1 wide receiver, 1 player at each position. Here's 2, MARQISE Lee and D.D. Westbrook, both top 24 wide receivers for me this week, and both have an opportunity to put up big stats. You've seen what the Texans have done to opposing wide receivers. They allow the 6th most fantasy points to the position. Lee and Westbrook, for the better part of the season, have been very good. Lee, for the most part, over the course of the season. Westbrook lately, 33 targets in his last 4 games. And at home, MARQISE Lee has been very good of late, averaging over 11 fantasy points in his last 4 home games. So both these guys have the chance to be solid number 2 fantasy wide receivers. And a guy that you want to sit this week is Mike Evans. I would start both Jaguars receivers over him. Evans has just been struggling. 11 targets in his last 2 games. He hasn't found the end zone in a very long time, and the matchup against Atlanta is going to be tough because of the pass rush that will be in Jameis Winston's face. They've given up 10 sacks in the last 2 games, and I think you'll see Atlanta get after Winston, make it tough for him to look downfield for Evans.
Big, bold call with Mike Evans, and I think it's a big, bold call when you say to start Jared Cook, but here I am saying it. We saw last week, once Amari Cooper went down for the Raiders, Cook stepped up. We've seen him get 5 or more targets in a bunch of games this season, but last week, 5 catches, 75 yards, and a touchdown in a matchup at Kansas City that we did not think was very good for him. He came through. Now he's at home against the Dallas defense. They've allowed a touchdown to a tight end in 4 of their last 6 games. With Amari Cooper not expected to play, I think Jared Cook is going to continue to get looks from Derek Carr. I think the Raiders are going to play from behind, and I think Jared Cook is worth starting at tight end. I'll take him over Evan Ingram this week. As his tight end to sit, it's Greg Olsen, another familiar name, but he hasn't been giving you familiar numbers this season. You have to go back to last year to find the last time he was any good for your fantasy team. I think the Packers have been pretty good over the balance of the season against tight ends, and I can't trust him. You know, Jamie, this is week 15. This is the fantasy playoffs. It's win or go home time. I can't trust that spot in my lineup to a guy who hasn't been better than 1, maybe 2 fantasy points all season long. He doesn't look the same with the foot injury. I say sit Greg Olsen.
Tough to trust Greg Olsen, but hopefully some of these other players that we've given you will help you in your playoff matchups. For Dave Richard, I'm Jamie Eisenberg. This has been Fantasy Football Today for CBS Local Sports.